Hi folks, Seth Leapson here. Thanks for watching my monologue. In these uncertain times, you may be thinking about personal protection. If you are, I urge you to visit my friends at Guns Etc. They'll help you find the perfect protection for yourself and your family, and they can even teach you how to use it. They've been protecting Arizonans for over 33 years, and they stand for the great principles this country was founded upon. Or you can just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back, January 7th, 2020. Bill Hemmer on Fox News yesterday morning said something clearly right. He said, "It feels like something significant has changed in America today." That was after one Senate loss in Georgia yesterday morning. Then came the breaching of the walls of Congress. Then the loss of the other seat in Georgia. It's hard to put finger on exactly what the something is that changed, but it may just be the feeling of a regretted surrender. It may be the feeling of a great loss of accomplishment. It may be the coming to terms with something we've had a hard time coming to terms with, the change in the American political culture from center right to liberal left. I think the most important part of that phrase is culture. Keep in mind, after all, it was a pastor who beat a businesswoman in Georgia. And some pastor he was. A slightly more slick, but also slightly more personally troubled version of Jeremiah Wright. 12 years ago, Barack Obama knew Jeremiah Wright would not find favor in America. Today, the younger version of him in Raphael Warnock does find such favor. Any loss, of course, is hard to come to terms with, to admit, as any failure is, personally as well as nationally. But I think two things. One is from Ann Landers. When you lose something, don't lose the lesson. The other, attributed to Winston Churchill, success is the ability to go from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. Before we accept too easily the argument that this is Donald Trump's fault, these losses, Byron York points out how you've heard the argument a million times in the last 4 years. But remember that Barack Obama, after 2 terms, left the White House, and U.S. Senate in the hands of the opposition party, the Republicans. So did George W. Bush leave it in the hands of the opposite party. Voters get tired of presidents sometimes and seek change. There can be a natural exhaustion to a certain level of success or massive victory even. Churchill himself was turned out of office after his successful steering of Great Britain and the free world to victory in World War II. You may be tired of the litany, but the sooner we accept it and understand it, the quicker I think our recovery. As Abraham Lincoln put it, if we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, we could then better judge what to do and how to do it. He said that in his House Divided speech in 1858. I'll come back to that in a moment. First, the litany. Education, almost all of it. Entertainment, almost all of it. Journalism and news media, almost all of it. CEO and corporate boardrooms, almost all of them. Professional athletics, almost all of it. They aren't just in the hands of liberals. They are in the hands of the left. We tend to shrug it off here and there. Oh, yeah, they want to change pronouns and maybe even create 50 different genders. Let them. Big deal. Oh, yeah, they want to force racial counts for admissions, jobs, board memberships. Let them. Big deal. Oh, yeah, they want to say a private entity that controls information for the public can censor an entire side of political discussion because it's private. Let them. Big deal. Oh, yeah, they want to tell us America is steeped in racism, so much so it's institutional. Let them. Big deal. Yeah, they want to call the president a fascist or a Nazi because he disagrees with one political perspective. Let them. Big deal. Oh, yeah, they want to profit off slave labor in China while lecturing us we cannot go on because part of our country had slavery here up until 155 years ago. Let them. Big deal. Oh, yeah, schools want to teach socialism and distort American history to help do so. Let them. Big deal. And enough letting of them, and you lose a country, and the deal becomes big. Cultural institutions matter, after all. The left knows that, otherwise they would not have taken them over. Think about 8 million high school and college students graduating with these teachings every year for going on 30 years. You quickly get to a number well over 200 million. We are a country of 331 million. So let us remember our Montesquieu, quote, "The deterioration of every government begins with the decay of the principles on which it was founded," close quote. Decay, interesting word, to decline or deteriorate over time. I know it's convenient and in fact true for us to say the problem is the left treat their ideological views as a religion or church, while we work and raise families and have real religions and churches that don't get involved in that sort of stuff. True enough, but the time to realize that politics can change a real religion or church is long past due. Just look at them. And the assaults on religious liberty, look at those too while you're at it. This is why I keep hammering home the view that our conservatism in America must be based on the teachings of conservatism that come from our founding principles in order to conserve not just those principles, but to conserve, preserve, and save America. Once we do come to grips with this, we will, in the words of Harry Jaffa, draw back the curtain of eternity and allow us as time-bound mortals to glimpse a divine purpose within a sorrow-filled present and tell us how our lives, however brief, can nonetheless serve a deathless end. Now, there is a certain consolation that with some patience, we may be able to rely on it. It will only be a temporary thing until we deploy conservatism root and branch back into our culture. It is this: the country will now experience a heavy dose of socialism. Not as we warned, not in theory, as those things are harder to appreciate and convince people of, but in practice. In other words, the theoretical will be proven by the actual. Daniel Gladdington at the Washington Times put it this way yesterday, and I think there's something right about it and yet something wrong about it as well. He writes, "The reason Mr. Biden will fail so soon is that many more millions than voted for him will realize and quickly that they made a mistake. In some ways, it will be a similar reaction as to the election of Jimmy Carter in 1976, when many of his voters quickly realized they'd screwed up." I agree with that. I'm not so sure I agree with what he writes next, which is this, quote, "So how did we elect the wrong person both in 1976 and again in 2020? The exact reason for this was or is the focused public voter reaction on a single and very specific set of circumstances rather than as an endorsement of a generalized political agenda. Specifically in 1976, it was the collective negative reaction to the Watergate scandal, the resignation of Richard Nixon, and Gerald Ford's pardon of him. The earlier resignation of Nixon's Vice President Spiro Agnew as part of a separate scandal also contributed. Result? A single negative issue set, and Mr. Carter was elected. In 2020, we were and still are in the midst of a pandemic that has killed millions worldwide and perhaps hundreds of thousands in America. As such, it was understandably the most central and single significant issue of the election, and it alone primarily determined its outcome. Ergo, Mr. Biden, close quote. I think I disagree with that. We have more access to more intelligence than ever before in our history and at our fingertips. And yet too many succumbed to fear and safetyism. That's a change. It's a big change. A seismic cultural disruption. One could buy into the safetyism if they wanted to, but that's the key, wanting to. David Limbaugh put the state of the state well yesterday, writing, quote, "No matter who wins, it's horrifying how many people, even in Georgia, a reliably red state, are unafraid of socialism and the rest of the crazy leftist agenda. That is chilling to me," close quote. Wanting to be afraid. Let me go back and say something about that, as if there were some form of security or surety or brotherhood or filiety in the concept of fear. A seismic change, as I said. We started out this country saying, "Give me liberty or give me death," pledging our sacred honor and lives for all that, right? We have the live free or die state, right? Later in the Civil War, the North marched in America, singing, "As he died to make men holy, we shall die to make men free." Then in the 50s and 60s, better dead than red. Indeed, as recently as 1983, President Reagan was speaking of that and said as much in his Evil Empire speech, with the story about a man who said he'd rather his daughter die believing in God than live in a country that ripped him away from her. Of course, too, Every member of the military knows all this. They sign up to die for something more important than themselves. In fact, for their country. That used to be a pretty universal ethic here. No more. We dip our children in Purell, to quote Adam Carolla, and we protect them from ideas that do not conform to worldviews we oddly defeated in the long twilight struggle. And the idea we surrendered was our own. So odd, but so true. So we struggle today because we surrendered our own worldview of freedom and equality to one of the most noxious doctrines of the 19th and 20th centuries that has one common denominator: anti-Americanism. What Stalin and Khrushchev and Brezhnev could not do to us and our allies, we've done to ourselves. Think on that. And then think again of what Lincoln said early on in his Lyceum address. If destruction be our lot, we ourselves must be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. Close quote. One final word on the protests and riots yesterday that needs to be said. At least the media now understands that riots are a bad thing, and not, as Chris Cuomo said last summer, not always important to be peaceful. At least Democrats now understand the importance of law enforcement, as they kept begging for more of it yesterday if they worked in the U.S. Capitol. One might even say Democrats also discovered the importance of barriers and walls. We conservatives need not apologize for being slow in denouncing riots or supporting and calling for more police or law enforcement. We've been consistent on that for a long time. I think the media and the Democrats do need to apologize. People will do what people do is a justification, permission for violence and rioting. And that's what Nancy Pelosi said in a response to being asked about riots in Baltimore last year. The shame is on them, not on us. It wasn't Republican leaders who yelled at a rally that Justices Sotomayor and Elena Kagan have released the whirlwind and that we are coming for them. Those exact words and threats, however, were shouted by Chuck Schumer at a rally about Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. We denounced that kind of thing, that kind of importuning the Democrats. But the media did not. Finally, in what I'm saying, I know it's a little more difficult to reclaim some institutions over others, corporations, entertainment, journalism. It's a little less difficult to go after universities and a little less difficult yet to go into or back into our elementary and secondary schools. As I closed the show yesterday, I'll close this monologue today with a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes. The mode in which the inevitable comes to pass is effort. Consciously or unconsciously, we all strive to make the kind of world we would like. And although we may consider criticism of the past futile, there is every reason for doing all that we can to make a future such as we desire. Let's get to work. I'm Seth Leibson. Be right back.